Hi, today what we're doing is a replacement of the parking brake shoes on a 2000 Toyota Avalon. It's pretty typical of a lot of the Toyotas that have disc brakes on the back with a small drum brake inside the disc. We've taken the caliper off, hung it with a hook so that it's out of the way, not hanging from the hose. And the next step is to pull the drum rotor combination off. In this case it's been off recently, so it comes off fairly easily. Sometimes you have to really work them hard to get them off. And one of the problems tends to be that the shoes are adjusted out so tightly against the drum that you can't clear them off. This little rubber plug right here, if you pop that plug out, you can back off the adjuster through that hole, which goes through that hole down to the star wheel adjuster down here. So you could back off the adjuster to help get it off. Sometimes they're rusted on pretty good, you end up having to beat them off. A lot of the times the rotors will have these two small holes in them. They're threaded, and you can put a metric bolt in there, and by tightening one on either side you slowly use it like a puller to pull it away from the rotor. So if you have that luxury that your brand of rotors has those on there, it does make life a lot easier to get them off when they're stuck. Okay, so we're going to replace these parking brake shoes. If you take a look at them, you'll see that they're very, very thin. At first glance that looks really bad, but when you see the new ones and how thin they are, you won't be too shocked. Brand new, they're only 0.079 inches thick. Very, very thin, less than 1/10 of an inch thick. So although it looks horrific, they actually aren't that bad. But we got to change them anyways because the mechanic who's safety in this car wants them done. So now we're going to remove the shoes. Okay, very typical of any drum brake. You got your two return springs that you need to pop off. Okay, in this case I just use a small flat screwdriver. They usually come off fairly easily. There is a special service tool for this job, which looks somewhat like this. You've probably seen these before. But unfortunately, you can't get at that spring properly. You can't get a straight shot at it. So unfortunately, that's not of much use. But the old screwdriver trick works pretty good, so that's how we do it. If we can get our screwdriver in there. There we go. So the two return springs are off. This little spacer keeps the springs lined up. It came right off. These were serviced recently, so I'm not surprised it came right off. Often they're pretty seized up. Okay. The shoes now come out very, very simply. And this is a beautiful design feature that Toyota has done. Instead of the normal little hole where the retainer spring goes, they've put a slot. And we could take advantage of that because the shoe will quite literally just slip right off. If we push the retainer spring, simple as that, it's out. Likewise on the other side. Simple as that, it's out. Okay, there's your parking brake shoe assembly. Okay, notice that the spacer bar has fallen out. As I expected that. Okay, so now we're going to change these. There's our star wheel adjuster. We'll be taking that out. Okay, again, these were serviced recently, so the adjuster's not seized up. I have on many occasions spent lots of time with heat and penetrating oil getting those suckers free. Replace them is a fairly inexpensive procedure. It's usually a good idea to go ahead and replace all this stuff. It comes in your spring brake kit. The prices vary a little bit, but on a Sunday afternoon you don't always have the option of getting that part, so we're going to make use of these again since they are still functional. Ideally I would have liked to replace all the springs, but that's just not happening today. Okay, so now we're going to take the park brake shoe off. Most of them have a little retaining clip like this, what we call a horseshoe clip. It goes to the parking brake lever. I find usually the easiest way to do it is just to spread it with the screwdriver. Something like that. Okay, be careful that you're pushing away from your hand, not towards your hand, because when that sucker slips, it'll do a real job on your hand. Okay, so we just spread that as much as we can. On the brake shoes, there's 3 contact points where the shoe is touching the backing plate. Okay, Sometimes those contact points can get pretty deep grooves in them. Not so much on parking brakes, but on regular drum brakes, that's often the case. But just make sure that's nice and smooth. If it isn't, just clean it up a little bit. I have seen them so bad that you had to take a grinder to them before, but there's not much metal on these ones, so I don't really want to take a grinder to it. And it's really not bad anyhow. All the contact points are pretty smooth still. And then we'll put a little bit of anti-seize grease on those contact points to help the shoes slide on and off easier. We don't want them hanging up on those. Just a little dab will do you. There, and there. Likewise on the back. In this case, the front leading shoe. Put a little dab on there. Okay, so now we're going to start putting our new shoes on. Okay, there's the park brake lever. Okay, it's going to be sitting in back here. One of the new shoes should come with a stud already pressed in there. I have seen some brands that the stud is not pressed in and you have to take it from the old one and transfer it over. Okay, but this one is already pressed in. That makes life good for us. A little bit of anti-seize again, never hurt. Keep the moving parts moving. Chances are these won't be opened up for a very long time to come. So let's do it right the first time. Okay, confirm that you've got your shoe in the right position. Okay, there is a small washer that goes on there, and a horseshoe clip goes back in. Okay. A pair of pliers usually is all it takes to pop it back in, and then you just crimp the horseshoe clip closed like that, and she's on. Okay, so this is now ready to go back together. Okay, you may have noticed that we have left the springs, the tie-down springs in place. Okay, again, that wonderful slot that Toyota put in the shoe makes it so easy. There is a little tab there. We got to make sure that the tab goes in the slot. So I'm going to hook the spring that holds the two shoes together in place, because it goes on the back side where it's awkward to reach later on. So I'll just get that in there now, if I can. Could you imagine trying to do that when it's installed already? So here we go. So we put that in. Okay. Now, a little trick that we discovered that'll make this easier is a little tool, somewhat like this, a little pick or something similar to that, with a 90-degree bend or a little bit better than 90-degree bend. I find that's quite useful. And we'll work through this hole by grabbing that spring and tugging the spring back. Actually, let me just put that down so you can see what I'm doing. All right, so I'm hooking it by the inner washer. Okay. And giving it a pull back. See that? Okay. And that way the shoe can slide in that slot. Okay, actually I rotated the wrong way, but it's all right. Get my clip out of there. And there we go. Okay. So you see how the little tab that's on the inner one went in that hole there? The spring is in place, shoe is in. Believe me, that's far easier than taking the whole thing apart and trying to wiggle those little washers in there. There's just not enough room for your fingers. Works slick if you've got that little hook. I'm sure you can make that out of a good strong piece of wire. It doesn't have to be an official tool, but that makes life much, much easier. All right, we'll put the second shoe in place. Similar technique. Okay, first you want to hook the spring on. Okay. There we go. Spring is on. Okay. In this case, we have to put the adjuster in between. They said, now this has all been freed up in anti-seize grease, so it all moves freely. Okay. So we slip that in between the two shoes. Like that. Okay. All right. So that's in position. We get our little hook. Work through the hole. grab hold of that washer, pull it in as much as you can, and slide the shoe over. So we got the spring pulled back now. Okay, we slide the groove over the pin, like that, and then release the spring. She's in. Okay. So finally we got to put this little spreader bar in between the two shoes. Okay, you'll notice that the spreader bar is not quite straight, it's got an arch to it. That has to match the arch of the hub there. Okay, so it's got to sit like that, not like this. Okay, that would hit the hub. Okay, you also notice that there's two slots. One is narrow, one is wide. The wide one goes to the back where the park brake lever is. It's going to go across the shoe and the park brake lever together on this side, and just the shoe on that side. Spring goes on there. Just slip that in between. Make sure we get both the shoe and the parking brake lever on the back. Just the shoe on the front, and it's in position. Now, it's going to be flip-flopping around in there until your return springs are on. So, it's in. Let's put our return springs on. So, we need our little spacer. Again, it's not quite flat either. I don't know if you can see that so well. There's a bit of an arch to it. The spring will be on this side of the arch. So, put that on. Okay, we hook our spring in the hole. Use our handy dandy screwdriver again to put it over top of the stud here. Oops, almost had it. Okay, so that's back spring on, confirming the spacer bar is in the right position. We'll then put our front spring on. So in the hole, put it up and over the studs. Okay. Confirming everything is in place. I think that's moved a little. There we go. Okay, spacer bar is in properly. Yes, it is. Shoes are on properly. The adjuster hasn't slipped out the bottom. No, it's in correctly. So our brake shoes are now on and ready for our brake drum. Okay. The adjustment for the parking brake shoes is done through this hole at the bottom. Okay. The drum has that spot right there where the rubber plug was in. Okay. So make sure you line up your drum with that hole. Okay, now you can see we're not quite going on properly, so let's double check what's the case there. Okay. The problem was the adjuster was turned a little bit, pushing the shoes out too far. So we got to back the adjuster all the way off. There we go. Now if you have this problem and you know everything's right, remember that there's some brands of park brake shoes that I've been reading about online that are too thick and that the drum won't go on no matter what you do. So if you're having problems and everything seems right, go back to the thickness of the shoes. Remember, it's only 0.079 inches. It's not very thick. And if the remanufacturer did something wrong and put too thick a lining on, your drum won't go on. Okay? So now we're on. Okay? To make our adjustment properly, we should secure the rotor drum assembly because we want it to be running true. We don't want it wobbling at all. It's going to throw off our adjustment. Okay, so 2 or 3 bolts. Put them hand tight, good and snug hand tight so that the rotor is snug up against that hub. Okay, everything's good and tight. So give it a turn. Okay. You can obviously turn it by hand. Okay. So we move that adjusting hole down to the bottom. And this is kind of a fishing in the dark expedition. You're going to try to turn that star wheel through the hole, but you're not going to be able to see what you're doing. A wide flat blade screwdriver, a proper adjusting tool is available, which is basically a wide screwdriver. What you're going to be doing is pushing the star wheel. On this model, when you push the star wheel so that the top of the star wheel is turning towards the center of the car, so you're pushing it this way, that tightens it. Other brands might be different, but that's the case on this one. So we got to fish around in there until we find the star wheel. Okay. And then we make a few turns. And you'll hear, when you're turning it, you'll hear a springy noise because the star wheel actually rubs up against that spring that holds the two shoes together. That's the mechanism that stops it from unwinding. Okay, so we've made our adjustment through that little adjusting hole at the bottom there. Okay, we'll put the plug back in. Keep the dirt and grime out. Okay. A slight amount of dragging noise is not unusual, but if it feels excessive or if it's hanging up at all, then you probably over adjusted it. I read on one site that if you tighten it up until it's locked so you can't turn anymore and then back off 8 little clicks, that would be perfect. I found that it was too loose and I backed it off 8 clicks, so I found it closer to 4 or 5. But use your judgment. It should have an ever so slight drag at best, no more than that. Okay. If it moves freely, testing it by setting the parking brake on would be a good idea. Okay, so we'll just do that. And you can see that it's locked right solid. Okay, you can put a pry bar in there if you really want to give it a test, but just from sheer experience I know that's good and tight. It'll be fine. And that's it. We just got to pop our caliper back on, pop our wheel back on, set the car back on the ground, and we're all done. Thanks for watching. Hope this has been helpful. Take care.